Before the iPhone, if you were technically savvy, you would walk around carrying 3 devices. You'd have a phone, a music player, and sometimes something called a PDA, which stands for Personal Digital Assistant. And if you weren't a techie, you just had to use a payphone. But today, we all carry a device that has transformed everything from communication to creativity. And we don't even need to be a technical genius. Welcome to the Science of Creativity, a podcast about art, design, and invention. I'm your host, Dr. Keith Sawyer. My mission with this podcast is to inspire you with stories of brilliant creators and world-changing inventions. If you like this episode, please subscribe, click like, leave a comment, and share it with a friend. You can listen to the Science of Creativity on all platforms and at sawyerpodcasts.com. In this episode of the Science of Creativity, you'll hear the real story of how the iPhone was created. It's not created by a single lone genius. It really is a collective invention, what I call group genius. And you'll also hear about why the Secret Service refused to let Barack Obama have an iPhone. This is the creation story of the iPhone. We usually don't think about where everyday objects come from. They're just part of our lives. You see iPhones everywhere around you. And personally, I can't remember a time before I took my iPhone everywhere with me. But like every object and every product in our lives, the iPhone was invented. And this story is about the creation story of the iPhone. Inventions come from groups and collaborations. They don't come from solitary lone geniuses. And contrary to what you might have heard, the iPhone was not invented by Steve Jobs. The real invention story involves decades of false starts, secret projects, technical breakthroughs, and really a surprisingly messy evolution. The iPhone wasn't just a technological invention. It created a new kind of culture, a new set of customs and attitudes. It even changed government. I'll tell you a story about President Barack Obama and the iPhone. Let's begin. If you weren't around in the 1990s, you might not know how different phones looked back then. If you saw one, you really understand how revolutionary the iPhone was. Because back then, a portable phone looked kind of like a brick with an antenna. You could make calls with them. Some of them you could even send short text. And that was about it. A little bit later, in the late 1990s and the 2000s, there was a phone called the BlackBerry, and it really ruled the business world with its physical keyboard. They were pretty expensive, so that's why for the most part, you'd only get one if you had an expense account and you wore a business suit. People were pretty addicted to it, and they started giving it the name Crackberry because people couldn't put it down. I mean, I remember the rest of us would make fun of them. They had their face glued to their device. We didn't realize then that we were all going to look that way before too long. With the BlackBerry, it had a physical keyboard with buttons, and you had to type on the physical keyboard. No one ever thought about a phone that could work without a physical keyboard. I mean, you could touch the screen on the BlackBerry, but you had to use a plastic pointer called a stylus. For the rest of us who didn't have the portable devices, we used to do things old school, analog. If you were driving to a new place, you took a folded paper map. If you wanted to listen to music, you took along your CD player and some headphones. And if you were one of those cutting-edge people who used email, you had to be sitting at your computer with a dial-up connection. If you didn't have an expense account with a BlackBerry, that was your life. And that was the world before the iPhone was released. Now, most people have heard that Steve Jobs, the president of Apple, played a big role in the creation of the iPhone, and that's true. When his team was working on it, they were thinking about the BlackBerry too, and they had that, physical keyboard. But Steve Jobs really hated buttons, and he really hated the stylus that you had to use to touch the screen on the BlackBerry. And his philosophy was, if you see a stylus, the designers blew it. So his designers and his programmers knew, they couldn't have a stylus with their new phone. Jobs believed that we should interact with devices using a natural way, with fingers. So Apple began by experimenting with a touchscreen, a table that was basically the size of a dinner table. It was just a prototype to see if we could make it work. And it had this really big new innovation. You could touch it in two places at the same time. With the BlackBerry, you could only touch once. I mean, if you tried to touch it twice, the screen was, just going to pick one or the other place, but it couldn't tell you were touching it twice. So this big table they got it to work, the two touch. And it was a really good prototype. But obviously, you can't carry this thing around with you, so it wasn't useful yet. But they'd given it a proof of concept, and this prototype was the secret origin of the iPhone. In a way, the iPhone project was a defensive move for Apple because they were making a ton of money on their iPods, the portable music players, and they were pretty sure that another company was going to come out with a portable phone that also played music, and they knew that was going to put Apple out of business because it would undercut all the iPod sales. So Steve Jobs' first idea was to partner with Motorola, already making a phone, right, on a music phone called the Roker, R-O-K-R. But what Motorola came up with was really horrible. It was slow, it was ugly, it was pretty limited. I mean, you couldn't even store much music on it. Steve Jobs publicly pretended to like it, but in private, he said, "We really can do better. We have to build our own phone." Apple hadn't designed a phone before, so this was a pretty big leap for them. So they needed a big team, and they needed some pretty cutting-edge engineers. In 2004, Apple created a set of offices that was in a hidden part of the building. They called it the Purple Door. I mean, no one knew that Apple was going to start doing this thing, so they wanted to keep it a secret. After all, they thought someone else was going to come out with a phone that would undercut the iPod, right? So a few top engineers got together and they started working in the Purple Door. They worked so hard, sometimes they even slept there. And their job was to create a touchscreen that you could touch in two different places, right, to take that big table prototype and put it down into a portable format. They wanted something also that worked only using touch, without any buttons, no physical keyboard. And that was a pretty radical innovation as well. So they had to work pretty hard. They worked insane hours and they signed NDAs. They swore secrecy. They couldn't talk about it. They had some really serious problems to solve. I mean, how do you type on glass? You still were going to need to type even if you didn't have the physical keyboard. And you couldn't type with little tiny buttons on the screen. They had to be big enough, to touch with a finger. And then how do you unlock a phone if it doesn't have any buttons on it? How do you prevent accidental touches? I mean, if it works with your finger, what if your finger just accidentally bumps up against it in your pocket? And then how do you make a battery last long enough? Because you got this bigger screen, it's using a lot more power than the smaller screen on the BlackBerry. Then came a breakthrough. They made the two-finger touch work with the small screen, and that had never happened before in a portable phone. But then they realized you could use two fingers to pinch to zoom, right? You could take your thumb and your index finger and bring them together and pull them apart. And that was a pretty cool innovation. So when Jobs saw this demo, he immediately said, "That's it. Now we know we have it." And the two-finger move became the soul of the iPhone. You're listening to The Science of Creativity, a podcast about art, design, and invention. If you're enjoying the episode, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast and rate the show and leave a comment because it helps people like you find the show. You can find The Science of Creativity on all podcast platforms. And now here's the big event that a lot of people have heard of because it's legendary. It was on January 9th of 2007, and it was the annual Mac World Conference. And Steve Jobs walked on stage, and here's what he said to the audience.
Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products of this class. A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
Everyone was really surprised. I mean, Steve Jobs was a showman. The Purple Dorm of engineers, they did a really good job with keeping the secrets of the new iPhone. So it really did surprise everyone. And when it came out, there were a lot of skeptics. Most people thought that leaving off the keyboard was a mistake, like Microsoft's CEO. He laughed. He said, "This is going to fail." Well, the iPhone shipped that June, and it was a huge success. It became the fastest-selling consumer product in history. So what made the iPhone such a success? I mean, a lot of people think the iPhone succeeded because of its design, the slick and modern design. I mean, it really did just look really cool. Some other people think it succeeded because of Steve Jobs' marketing genius. Or maybe it was because people already loved their iPods and it was pretty easy for them to make the switch. But there wasn't any one single reason that the iPhone succeeded. It's because of a complex and yet seamless system of different technical features. We know today all of the different things our phones can do, but in 2007, no one really imagined that you'd get all of these features in one device. I mean, think of this long list. First of all, you've got the multi-touch interface. You've got iTunes integration. You've got a camera. You've got accessories. You can go out to the cloud with the internet. And you had all these developers who were releasing apps for this innovation that was called the App Store, so that the phone could be extended with new features. And Apple's engineers, they didn't even have to do it, right? Developers would release for the App Store. So this iPhone, it wasn't just a cool-looking piece of black glass. It was an ecosystem. I mean, it changed so many industries. It changed the camera industry. It changed how music is distributed and consumed. It changed how we get around with its GPS and its map app. But the iPhone wasn't only about its technical features. The techies really did love it. But for the rest of us, it changed how we interact, how we get through every day. Of course, it changed dating. It changed the way we remember things, or maybe we don't remember because we can get information from anywhere, anytime. It changed navigation, how we drive, how we walk. I mean, you probably have forgotten how you used to drive around everywhere without looking at the map or your phone. And it definitely changed art and creativity. In a way, the phones became extensions of our minds. And now, a lot of people can't imagine life without their iPhone. But next, I'm going to tell you a story about how sometimes even the most powerful people in the world can't get an iPhone. In 2009, Barack Obama became the president of the United States. And he soon discovered a shocking fact that he wasn't allowed to have an iPhone. He'd gotten used to having his iPhone everywhere with him, just like so many other people. But it was the Secret Service that forced him to use a modified BlackBerry. And it could contact maybe 6 different people. I mean, even after the iPhone had been out for a while, the BlackBerry had better security features. But, remember that the BlackBerry might have been cutting edge around 2000, but it seemed pretty primitive by 2009. So Obama joked about it in public, but I think he was really actually pretty unhappy about it. I mean, he said, "I'm not allowed an iPhone. The security agencies won't let me. My daughters, however, have no problem at all." And after leaving office, one of the first things he did was to get back his iPhone. I guess maybe security isn't so important once you're not president anymore, or maybe the iPhone just got better after he'd been president for 8 years. And there's a photograph of him showing it off to reporters because he's so happy he got it back. I mean, the iPhone changed everyone's lives, from the powerful to the rest of us. The reason why we all understood Obama's joke was because so many of us already had our iPhones, and we knew how much we were using them in our lives even in 2009. Steve Jobs has gone down in history as one of the most innovative technical leaders in information technology, certainly with computers, with phones, first portable music player, the iPod. But the iPhone was not created by one person. It was not created just by Steve Jobs alone. It wasn't even created by this small team in the purple dorm room. It emerged from what I call group genius, from hundreds and thousands of people. I mean, that includes decades of research developing the various technologies that went into the iPhone. There were thousands of engineers. There were supply chain innovations. There was advances in silicon physics, product designers, touchscreen pioneers, app developers who created the app ecosystem in the iPhone, and really billions of users who shaped the ecosystem through their behavior. The iPhone is one of the clearest examples of group genius and collaborative innovation in modern history. It emerged from these thousands of people. I mean, they included engineers, designers, and even us, the users, who influenced how it got developed and modified by the way that we used it. Even the BlackBerry played an important role because it demonstrated the market potential. If you're Steve Jobs and you see a product that someone is so addicted to using that they're calling it the Crackberry, I mean, any business leader would want a piece of that success. And sure enough, Apple got what they wanted, and they even exceeded the success of the BlackBerry. The iPhone is more than a device. It's an invention that reshaped culture, creativity, and everyday life. It was created through collaboration, but even more important is that it enabled collaboration through social networking. Like every device that transforms society, there is both good and bad. Smartphones have brought social media even to very young children, and the evidence is pretty strong that this really is a bad idea. But for adults, these devices bring us together. They keep us in touch. They enable new kinds of collaboration and communication. If you took one of these devices back to the 1920s, it would seem like magic. Even if you took it back to the 1970s or 1980s, it would seem like magic. And honestly, it still is magic. Thank you for listening to The Science of Creativity. If you liked this episode, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast, and please rate the show because that helps others like you hear about the show. Please write in the comments if you have requests or ideas for future episodes. I'll see you next time on The Science of Creativity for insights and inspiration about art, design, and invention.